Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to the Unveiling podcast, where we embark on a riveting journey through the hidden corridors of history and society. Today, we are thrilled to bring you to a special three-way conversation delving into intricacies of the UN's foreign policies and its profound implications for the developing countries. Joining me are two insightful minds, each bringing their unique perspectives on the table.
Thank you for having us, and I'm very excited today to dive deep into the complexities of the US foreign policy, especially in the context of its impact on the nation who are striving for the development.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here. The topic's often brushed over, and I believe it's high time we shed a light on the discrepancies between the United States' proclaimed values and its actions on the global stage.
Couldn't agree more. The hypocrisy surrounding the US foreign policy is a vast and intricate tapestry, and I'm eager to unravel some of its threads with both of you.
In today's episode, we pull back the curtain on the facade of the United States as a champion of democracy and freedom. Our discussion aims to peel away the layers, exposing instances where US actions have contradicted these professed values, for backing up the authoritarian regimes to sidestepping international laws. The consequences of US foreign policies reverberate across the developing world. As we engage in this three-way dialogue, we will navigate through the historical context, contemporary events, and overarching themes that define USA's interactions with the global community. Our goal is not to dissect the issues, but to foster a more informed and curious perspective amongst our listeners. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, for a thought-provoking conversation that transcends boundaries and challenges preconceived notions. This is the Unveiling podcast, where the three voices converge to unravel the mysteries of US foreign policies and its impact on the world. Let's the exploration begin.
Hello, everyone. I am the therapist, and we are here to explore the historical event of the US foreign policy. I am joined by Maverick and the one and only Doc. Today, we'll be unpacking the complexities that shaped our world. So, Doc, what are your views on these policies?
To take it over, let's just start with the late 19th centuries when United States acquired overseas territories. Like Philippines and Cuba, and they have been exploiting them for their own economic gains.
I'm very curious about the thought process you are going through, Magri. Can you please say that?
True, this sets the stage for pattern intervention and often at the expense of local population at that place.
Fast forward to the mid 20th century, World War II, where the US dropped atomic bombs on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We all know that. What was that? Little boy and fat man, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
A well-known example of it is a very well-known example of using force on some of the devastating scale.
Well, I can't argue you here. There are no arguments. It was definitely one of those dark chapters that demonstrates the length US is willing to go to achieve wartime objectives.
The lesser known secret wars of Laos is another yet example. There were dropped 2 million tons of bombs there.
It's no joke that.
Well, it is very staggering, and the long-lasting impact of the region is very much undeniable.
Well, if we're talking about that context, let's just look at the Vietnam War. It's a recent, right? The use of chemical weapons like Agent Orange, it resulted a minimum staggering amount of millions of deaths and long-lasting health effects on Vietnamese population.
The war tolls on economic and infrastructure immense, is setting a precedent of US approach in foreign policy.
Well. These actions indeed showcase the historical groundwork that has influenced the current state of the US foreign policies.
Now, just delving deeper to each point to understand the intricate nuisances and repercussions, these historical events shaping lens through which we view US foreign policy today.
Hello, people. We are today be discussing on the very hot topic that is Laos bomb blast. As we know, I am joined by Maverick and Doc, and we will be diving deep into the devastating impact of the secret war during Vietnam conflict.
This covert bombing campaign in Laos kept heading from the world aimed at the disputing North Vietnamese supply routes. Over 2 million tons of bombs dropped. It's a staggering amount.
The secrecy surrounding the campaign is very alarming. The American people and much of the world were kept dark about this topic and the extensive bombing in Laos that happened.
Yeah, I guess so. Like the consequences were profound, not only in the terms of human life, but also the country's infrastructure. Like about 30% of the bomb didn't detonate, leaving an unexploded ordnance of scattered across the landscape.
It's one of the things that is very scary to think about. Just imagine living a normal life. The ongoing threat is staggering. Over 20,000 people have been killed or injured by unexploded bombs since the war.
The impact ripples through every aspect of Laos, its economy, its environment, and social fabric. The forced displacement of people, the disruption of agriculture there, industry, and its haunting legacy is still going on.
And you know, the despite of this devastation, US has never officially apologized or taken responsibility of these events. This lack of accountability speaks the volume of the broader patterns in the US foreign policy.
It's an indicative of troubling trend, a failure to acknowledge the harm caused by actions taken in the pursuit of geopolitical objectives. It's been from there for a long time.
The consequences Laos has been facing till the war since the war is still now going on. They are one of the poorest countries in the world struggling to recover from the aftermath of this secret war.
Understanding the impact of US action in the Laos is very crucial, not just for the historical accuracies, but also to shed light on the ongoing repercussion of this overlooked chapter in the history. Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic that is the atomic bombings on Japan. We'll be unraveling the complexities surrounding the pivotal moment in the history. So let's go.
The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II were indeed the turning point. The devastation caused by the atomic bombs was catastrophic, with tens of thousands losing their lives and entire cities left in ruins.
The immediate and long term effects of the survivors were equally devastating, with many suffering from radiation related illness and the rest of them lose their lives.
Dude, but beyond the human toll, these bombings marked a profound shift in the global power dynamics. The US emerged as the dominant superpower, being sole possessor of the nuclear weapons at that time.
The thing was that this dominance triggered a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union, as we know, the Cold War, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war multiple times over the following decades.
The bombing also set a precedent for the US's willingness to use force to achieve objectives, regardless of the widespread devastation it may cause. It became a justification for future military interventions of any place.
Yeah, exactly. The legacy of these bombings continues to shape the US foreign policies, like the pursuit of military intervention and the regime change in the countries that don't align with US interest. They has often resulted in disastrous consequences for the local population.
The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as a stark reminder of the devastating impact military forces can have on innocent civilians. It underscores the importance of diplomacy and peaceful solution in a global conflict.
Welcome back, guys, and today we are going to discuss about a very critical topic, that is the history of racism and discrimination in the foreign policy of US. Uh, Today we'll dig deep into the troubling aspect of this complex narrative.
Starting with the Cold War era, where the US supported dictators and authoritarian regimes in the Latin America and Africa simply because they were anti communist. This support often came at the cost of human rights abuses and suppression of democratic movement.
Absolutely. It's a dark chapter where strategic interest took precedence over ethical consideration, perpetuating injustice in pursuit of geopolitical goals.
Exactly. The discriminatory approach extends to the refugee and the immigration policies. With the recent examples like the Muslim travel ban and the family separation at the border, these policies, particularly under the Trump administration, face widespread criticism for being inhuman.
The major credit for this goes to the egoistic nature of the US foreign policy. that is evident in its approach to international agreements and organization. The withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, despite the overwhelming scientific evidence, speaks to a prioritization of national interests over the global concerns.
It is a pattern of behavior where US has a history of stepping away from international commitments when it no longer aligns with its immediate interest. This raises question about the country's commitment to collaborative global effort.
We come to a conclusion that the US foreign policy, characterized by racism and egoistic nature, has had far reaching consequences. Prioritizing national interests over the well being of other nations and their people has left a lasting impact on the global community.
Welcome back, guys, to a sovereign discussion on the US involvement in the Iraq and the Syrian civil war. Today, we are going to unravel the complexities and the consequences of these conflicts.
Starting with the Iraq War, where the US invasion was simply based on false information. Despite the lack of evidence, the military campaign continued, leading to the death of thousands of innocent people and displacement of millions.
It is a tragic reality. The aftermath of Iraq war resulted in the destruction of infrastructure and destabilization in the region, leaving a lasting impact on countless lives.
Yeah, exactly. Like similarly, the US involvement in the Syrian civil war under the guise of promoting human rights and democracy has faced controversies. In reality, it seems more about supporting specific factions and exerting influence in the region than fostering peace.
This intervention has had severe consequences with millions displaced and essential infrastructure like homes, schools, and hospitals destroyed.
Both conflicts highlight US's disregard for international law and sovereignty of other nations. The invasion of Iraq without UN's authorization and airstrikes in Syria and the other bombings and massive airstrikes and invasion of army in different Middle East countries and that region without any permission set a dangerous precedent for global relations.
The deeper the issue of racism and a lack of empathy towards the culture and background also come into the focus. Like the eagerness to intervene seems rooted in a belief of American exploitation, undermining the lives of all well-being of the people and diverse cultural backgrounds.
It's a failure to understand the complexities of this conflict and a disregard for the lives impacted by these actions.
In conclusion, US's involvement in the Iraq war and Syrian civil war left a trail of devastation, displacement and loss of life. The disregard for international laws and lives of people from different cultural backgrounds is a stark reminder for the need of reflection and change.
Hello and welcome back again, guys, to this very insightful discussion on rather a very controversial aspect of the US foreign policy. As we are going to dig deep into the historical complexities of the US support system for the one and the only extremist group.
Let's kick things off with looking back on the Cold War era, where the US backed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to counter the Soviet Union. This support, including figures like Osama bin Laden, is widely acknowledged as having played a role in the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in the region.
A similar pattern emerged in the early stages of Syrian civil war. The US supported groups against the Assad regime, including ISIS. While initially aimed at toppling Assad, some of the groups had broader and more extreme agendas, leading to shocking tactics that appealed the world.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Like it is just not confined to Middle East. In Latin America also, the US supported the right-wing government and the parliamentary groups, often at the expense of democratic values and human rights, contributing to the political instability and the conflict.
These actions have had lasting consequences, fueling resentment and providing ammunition for the extremist groups' propaganda, which they use for recruitment and to justify their violent action in the region.
Importantly, the US's tendency to prioritize its interest over the well being of other nations has eroded trust in its foreign policy and its standing as a global leader as of now.
Exactly. In recent years, there's been a growing recognition of the need for a more nuanced and responsible approach to UN foreign policy. Once the value of diplomacy and human rights are multilateral cooperation.
However, it is essential to acknowledge the complex legacy of the US interventism and the ongoing challenges of the global conflict and instability.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a thought provoking discussion on the impact of US economic policies on a global stage. We are going to explore the multi phase dimension of this complex issue in this part.
Starting by examining the free trade agreements such as NAFTA, where the outsourcing of jobs to countries with lower labor costs like Mexico has been a notable outcome. While it may benefit US corporations and consumers in the short term, the long-term consequences such as decline in domestic manufacturing and increased income inequality need more careful considerations.
Absolutely. And this pattern extends to the use of economic sanctions as a foreign policy tool, with recent examples like the sanctions on Huawei disrupting global technological supply chains. It underscores the potential ripple effects and need for more nuanced approach that considers the interconnectedness of global markets that US needs to understand.
Yeah, without a doubt, US dominance in international financial institutions like IMF and the World Bank is another critical aspect. This influence has often been used to push policies benefiting US interest, such as austerity measures and deregulations, which can have detrimental impacts on the developing economies.
Creating a cycle of dependence on the Western financial institutions, perpetuating the US economic power in the world.
Overall, the US's economic policies have significant and lasting impacts globally. It is crucial that they should understand and carefully consider the long term consequences of their actions and prioritize the need and interest of all other nations just that their own before implementation of these monetary actions they take.
Hello, everyone, and we are back today with a very interesting discussion on the one and the only, the big capitalist dog, and its issue on the sales of arms and weapons during war. Uh, Today, we are going to dive into the complexities and consequences of this global concern.
Starting with the ongoing conflict in Yemen, US's arming of Saudi Arabia has drawn significant criticism. Despite evidences of war crimes and civilian casualties, the US continues to provide arms including precision guided missiles. This has sparked calls for re-evaluation of US's relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia isn't the only beneficiary here. Israel, a key US ally, has received substantial military aid and weapons, contributing to the ongoing conflict with Palestine. Critics argue that such support fuels intentions and human rights violation in the occupied territories.
Yeah, everyone knows that Ukraine is another theater where US is involved. It provides the military aid to the government in its fight against Russian-backed separatists. While the US claimed it support Ukraine's sovereignty, concerns about the escalation of the humanitarian impact on the conflict have been raised.
These instances underscore the far reaching consequences the US arms sales during wars, not only for the countries directly involved, but also for the global security and stability.
It's crucial to carefully consider the implications of these sales and ensure that they do not exacerbate conflicts to contribute to human suffering.
Hello, people. We are back here to again deep dive into the consequential topic of U.S. abandonment of the commitment in the international relations. Here we are going to examine the far-reaching impacts on these actions.
One striking example in the US withdrawal of troops from Syria, leaving the Kurds vulnerable to attack from Turkey. This move forced Kurds into a deal with the Syrian government for protection, further strengthening the government's power and weakening Kurds' position in the region.
Similarly, the US's abandonment of Afghanistan after the Soviet Afghan War left the country in chaos, creating a power vacuum that facilitated the rise of Taliban. Failure to provide adequate aid and support to Afghanistan in the aftermath had dire consequences there.
Exactly, the US history of supporting authoritarian regimes, as seen in Saudi Arabia and Chile, often comes at the expense of democratic movements and human rights. Like in 1973, I remember coup in Chile backed by US led to overthrow of
Just like that, I remember another instance is the US response to conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where the promises of support were not fully, honored. While some aid was provided, the failure to follow through on commit.
Pattern of US backing out from promises has created a sense of uncertainty among nations, making
Yeah,
them wary
right,
of
right.
accepting a US aid or
Overall,
US.
the US's history of re-engineering the on commitments has created a sense of uncertainty, right, and has had significant consequences, contributed to decline in trust in US foreign policy and leading to instability and conflict in regions where
and all these consequences lead to a brutal dictatorship, which is not good for global.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. I hope you are not freezing cold in our conversation and during this podcast because today we are going to heat up this podcast with Cold War controversial topic.
One significant aspect was the US support for authoritarian regimes in Latin America, like Pinochet regime in Chile, and Contras in Nicaragua. This support, often framed as anti-communism, came at the substantial cost of human rights and democratic movements in those countries.
Vietnamese War is another dark chapter that we get to know from the 1955 to 1975. Despite significant loss of life and damage to Vietnamese infrastructure, still the US fell short of achieving its objective of containing communism.
Beyond these conflicts, the US action during the Cold War was profound and lasted consequences globally. The Cuban Missile Crisis and the subsequent embargo on Cuba is still influence the US-Cuban relations today. Like that the Iran contract scandal or the support of
Totally heard of it.
It's crucial to recognize that the willingness to support authoritarian regimes and engage in military conflicts during the Cold War came at a substantial cost, impacting human rights and democratic movements in the nation where US operated.
The legacy of this era continues to shape UN foreign policy till now, and understanding its complexities is a vital for comprehending the challenges faced in the contemporary geopolitical landscape.
Exactly, attributed to the destabilization of Middle East also. Hello people, we are back to critically examine the USA's action in international organization. Today we are going to explore the criticism surrounding the US approach for the global governance.
One notable aspect is the use of veto power in UN Security Council, where the US has often blocked resolutions that run counter to its interests. The vetoing of resolutions condemning Israel's action towards Palestine has drawn widespread international condemnation.
Additionally, the control the US exerts over NATO has raised concerns. The organization, seen by some as a tool for further US interest, has expanded into Eastern Europe, triggering tensions with Russia and fueling accusations.
Exactly. The disregard for the international law and organizations has too given rise to the sense of impunity. The US actions such as use of torture post of 9/11 have often gone unchecked.
Let's not forget the influence US wields over the international financial institution like the World Bank and the IMF. Critics argue that the policies enforced, such as austerity measures on developing nations, perpetuate economic imperialism and deepen the global inequality.
Exactly, in essence, the USA's dominance in the international organization is perceived by many as a means to advance in its own interest, potentially at the expense of fostering global peace and cooperation. We are back here, guys, to another candid exploration of the complex history of civil rights and freedom in the United States. Today, we are going to dive into the US action for dictonomy and both domestically and internationally.
Starting with the treatment of Native Americans during the country's colonization, a dark chapter marked by forced relocations, broken treaties, and devastating spread of diseases that claimed in the
civil rights movement in 1960s, we witnessed a struggle for equality marred by government and law enforcement violence. The brutal beating of protesters on Edmund Pettus Bridge and assassinations of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X
underscore the persistent systemic racism and violence in the US.
Additionally, the use of torture and inhuman treatments of prisoners at Guantanamo Bay and other detention centers raises serious human rights concerns, contradicting the images of US as a global leader in democracy and human rights.
All these instances highlight the hypocrisy and the inconsistency of US that approach to the promoting human rights and democracy both domestically and abroad.
Yeah, and while acknowledging the progress made, it is very clear that there is still a long road ahead for the US to fully live up to the ideals and its values.
That's true.
Okay, so thank you people for joining us in this enlightening journey through the complex history of US foreign policy. Your engagement in these crucial topics is what makes the Vervam podcast possible.
We hope this episode has deepened your understanding of the economic, political, and social impact of US foreign policies on countries around the world.
And remember, understanding our past is the key to shape a better future. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the world around you.
We really appreciate your support and there's more to come. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore pressing issues of our time.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a comment on this video. Your feedback helps us improve and bring you more high quality content.
And yes, there are more podcasts in the pipeline. We are committed to continuing this series and with more videos currently in production.
Thank you again for listening our podcast and until the next time,
Stay curious, stay informed.